basically a left-handed reliever who wasn't getting left-handed hitters out, and I quickly came to realize there wasn't really a market for that. Either it was time for me to make a pretty dramatic change, or I'd probably be on my way out from baseball. I was looking to make some pretty drastic changes, overhaul my mechanics a little bit, and try and come up with a new effective delivery. Rapsodo gave me, as I said, kind of gave me this feedback. It allowed me to link up video imaging along with the data. I needed to create a true left-on-left breaking ball. I'd always been a very traditional, high three-quarter arm slot type guy. As I got older and lost some of the ability to beat guys in the zone, and so I started to kind of research how I could get more movement. I started to identify kind of the gold standard, some of the best-in-class type pitchers, and see if I couldn't kind of model the behavior, the profiles of my pitches the way those guys do. So I looked, when you think of left-handed relievers and you think of kind of a deceptive breaking ball and a sinker, the guys that I immediately went to were Andrew Miller's slider and Zach Britton's sinker. And while I recognized I wouldn't ever create those pitches, as a 5'10", 88-mile-an-hour throwing pitcher, if I could learn the way those pitches moved, if I could kind of see their 3D flight path, I thought maybe at least I could mimic them and have a little bit more success. Rapsodo represented the perfect model for me because I could kind of iterate in real time. So to say, okay, well, if I can make my sinker 50% better, that's successful. If I could make my slider 50% better, that's successful, rather than to say, I won't be happy until I have the best slider in baseball. So one of the first things I did kind of through this process was get some baseline data. We collected that actually, the first set of data that we collected was, I believe, in late September, and that was when I was still throwing over the top, just to say, okay, this is where we started. This is the Craig Breslow that none of the 30, not a single 30 of the 30 teams in baseball have any desire to acquire. So that was our baseline. That was kind of our seller. And then, as you go through this process, pitching overhand was something that I had done for close to 30 years. So, I thought I was going from throwing at this high three-quarter slot to submarine when I had actually only changed my arm angle by a couple of degrees. And so Rapsodo gave me, as I said, kind of gave me this feedback. It allowed me to link up video imaging along with the data to say, okay, while you think that was a drastic change, take a look at both the numbers and the visual and realize it wasn't. So, I could kind of go pitch to pitch and say, I'm going to keep lowering my arm slot until I get to something that is kind of the right combination or the kind of optimal combination of feel and result. One of the first things we noticed, I think, was, I kind of eliminated a lot of the backspin, turned it into side spin, got much more horizontal movement. Spin had reduced, so we were dealing with more sink. I hadn't yet started to spin anything, but we saw that this was a promising path. Did it again in November or December, and saw kind of a tick up in velocity as I increased intensity, but not really a tick up in spin rate. When I look back and recognize this was an experiment, it was vital to be able to get measurable data and also outline measurable goals from the beginning to know that at the end I was approaching kind of where I needed to go. And one of the biggest benefits was there was no longer subjectivity to it. Either I or my agent could call up a team and say, here's a data set. If you like it, Craig's a free agent, he's available. If you don't, you don't. But you're no longer taking my word that my client is in the best shape of his life. He's never thrown harder. He's never been more ready to have a breakout season. When we're just looking at raw data, you kind of remove the human element, which I think is important. The improvement in side spin was kind of a product of both this innate feel for pitching that I think some people have and maybe some people don't, but also I think maybe the kind of finer refinement was a result of this ability to get immediate feedback. And I know I kind of keep coming back to that, but when you're, if I were to have done this 18 months ago, before I knew about Rapsodo, it would be a full bullpen session before I would have known if I was making any progress, maybe even more. I would have thrown 30 or 40 pitches. I would have tried to videotape some of them. I would have gone back at the end of it. I would have looked and I would have said, that was a wasted 40 minutes and we're not going to do this again for 3 days. Now I can throw a pitch, I can look at it and I can say, that was really good, let's do it again. This has been a very interesting process and certainly one that I would say is not over. But going into free agency, when the free agency period started in November, I had very little, if any, interest. That was probably the most significant driver in wanting to take on this challenge. Once we saw the progress that was being made, we realized that it would make a lot of sense to throw for scouts in January and see if I could garner some interest that way. Had, I think, 15 or 20 teams represented at a showcase in January. And from that, got, I believe, somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 to 18 offers, to come into camp with no guarantees, but to have the chance to put this kind of into an in vivo setting, right? We'd worked in the lab for a while, and now it was time to face hitters and get results and see how this was going to play, in a competitive environment. This kind of mentality, this idea, this willingness to constantly try and improve was something that the Twins recognized could be a very valuable asset to an organization that was young and maybe on the verge of becoming a competitive team. So it came into spring training and immediately got great feedback. First bullpen that I was throwing, I think one of the catchers said I was the toughest guy to catch in camp. Had not faced hitters yet, so that was probably the single biggest obstacle to overcome. All of this worked great on paper, it looked great in an Excel spreadsheet, but what would happen when Joe Mauer stood up there and told me what he saw, and the feedback was great. Guys were talking about late movement, late sink, deception, the inability to pick up the ball, and that carried over once we started playing games, had a really good spring, and ended up making the opening day roster. Pitch design, I think, is an interesting concept. I don't think it's new. I don't think it's novel. I think the way pitch design existed 20 years ago was somebody would have played catch with Mariano Rivera and said, you have a great cutter, can you show me how to do that? Now we've probably eliminated the need to kind of have this model exist, and we can kind of draw up something in our heads, right? It allows us to be a little bit more creative and a little bit more objective. I can say, I wonder if I can make a pitch that does blank, and then we take that a step further and say, okay, in order to make a pitch do that, I need to have a spin axis of this. I need a ball to spin this way or a ball not to spin, and let's just kind of go out there and see how close we can come to it. But for me, pitch design was all about really figuring out how to throw two pitches. A pitch that sank and a pitch that slid. I needed something that was going to get swings and misses from left-handed hitters as a left-handed reliever, and so I played around with grips, spin axis. I saw the spin efficiency, kind of the ratio of productive spin to total spin changed as I changed grips, changed arm angles, changed finger pressure, until again, I kind of found this optimal result for me. And so, what started as a can I throw Andrew Miller slider, ultimately, like I said, became, well, how can I improve what I can do? How do I find the optimal breaking ball for me, given my lever lengths, my fingers, my pressure, my kind of natural mechanics, and those may be different. But again, the ability to do this in real time, I think, makes it achievable for anyone. Right? There are very, very few people, or far fewer people, who would go out and work, for an hour a day with minimal effect to try and achieve a certain pitch. But when you can do this and you can throw a pitch and you can see that you're making progress, kind of pitch to pitch. The advent of analytics has certainly permeated the game today more so than in the past. I think, there have been, I think, general ideas about some of the things that we're able to measure today. I kind of laugh at the idea that spin rate is something new, right? People are talking about it, we can measure, now it's quantified, I can give you a number for it, but 35 years ago, a scout would go to a game and say, this guy's got life through the zone, or his fastball plays up, right? It's 88, but guys swing at it like it's 95. We've quantified that. Now we know how to measure it, so a scout, someone in the front office, a pitcher has the ability to say, I know why my 88 gets more swings and misses than your 95. And I think the next step, which we're probably on the horizon of, is to determine why that's important, right? It's great for someone to say, well, so-and-so has an elite spin rate, right? I think the next connection to make is, what do we do with that information? How does that dictate usage? Pitch choice, does that make someone more prone to being able to throw a curveball or a slider? You think about, there's probably a little bit of a disconnect right now in that I think maybe the analytics departments, some of the kind of new, younger, progressive thinkers are maybe a step ahead of where players are, but I do think eventually there will be a marriage between the two. And like I said, I think the next step is for someone to say, hey, so-and-so, despite the fact that you only throw 90 miles per hour, you have an elite spin rate. You get true backspin on the ball. It will play up. You should think about throwing your four-seam fastball up in the zone. It gives pitchers a chance to recognize their strengths that aren't always so obvious. I was actually able to throw a couple of bullpens, kind of see what I was doing in season compared to where I was going into spring training. Wanted to see if maybe I'd kind of become derailed a little bit, deviated from some of the keys that had made me so successful in the winter and through spring training in the first part of the season, and actually came to realize that the sinker was sinking more, the slider was sliding more, velocity was up a little bit, so it kind of came down to execution. And oftentimes the simplest solution is the right one. I was still getting great movement. I still had that deception. I was leaving balls up in the zone and they were getting hit. But it was really important for me to see that, right? I mean, I'm not sure that had someone told me day one of my struggles, hey, you're just getting the ball up, I wouldn't have said, well, maybe that's it, but at the same time, I've got a new delivery, I've got a new pitch repertoire, I'm not sure that I'm using it correctly, maybe my arm slots come up. There were a whole host of possibilities, but until I was able to kind of go through and check off and eliminate some of them, I wasn't able to convince myself that it was simply a matter of execution, and Rapsodo became a really critical tool for that. I'm not sure that intelligence is a crucial piece in all of this, because it doesn't take a ton of intellect to want to be good, to want to improve. If you can, it takes some creativity, I think. I think if you can kind of imagine a pitch that you'd like to throw, or you can think about the way you want a pitch to behave, then now you have the tool to get as close to that as possible. The Rapsodo dashboard is incredibly user-friendly. It literally gives you a line of the way the ball is moving through space. It was simply a matter of being dedicated and diligent and knowing what I wanted to get out of it. There are tremendous benefits to Rapsodo for a host of reasons. As guys are getting bigger and stronger, to make sure that they're not risking injury. I think there's probably certain pitfalls, certain red flags that could arise, and if you're collecting data regularly and you notice some kind of drastic deviation, you should probably take a step back and recognize that something is different now, and it's something that you have to pay attention to. As someone starts to develop a pitching identity, Rapsodo is a valuable tool to help determine kind of who you are as a pitcher. For me, I've noticed it's a great troubleshooting guide. This was a pretty bumpy road, and I imagine I'll still find some hiccups and obstacles. But because I had collected data at the beginning, because I was able to kind of get real-time feedback as I was going through this, I could say, what is the reason I'm struggling right now? Do I have to overhaul this whole thing and blow it up, or do I simply have to make sure that the ball that's staying at the thighs doesn't, that I make sure it's at the knees. And so, I don't think there are really any limitations on who can benefit from the tool, so long as you kind of understand what you're looking for and know where you're trying to get. I would recommend Rapsodo for amateur players. The price point makes it incredibly affordable. It's something you can set up in your bullpen sessions, and you can really get a good idea of who you are as a pitcher. I'd recommend Rapsodo, for guys like me, for major league pitchers who are looking, to maybe take the next step forward to try and figure out what can put them over the hump and allow them to enjoy sustained success.